A millionaire paid a homeless woman to have his child. But when the baby arrived, he fell to his knees, crying. Hello, lovers of mystery and drama. If you've ever believed that money can buy anything, this is the story that will make you doubt. It will take you on a journey of loneliness, redemption, and the truth that hides behind the coldest contracts. Hit like, subscribe, and get ready for an ending that will make you cry. Charles Montblanc, a 45-year-old man who seemed to have everything and yet lacked what truly mattered, found himself in his luxurious penthouse on Manhattan's Upper East Side, contemplating the hazy sky. The towering skyscrapers that surrounded him felt like empty mirrors, reflecting a life full of financial triumphs, yet completely devoid of deeper meaning. The bustling business of the stock market, the eternal city lights, and the endless murmur of millions of people below were not enough to fill the void of loneliness that suffocated him. I have everything a man could desire, everything but the one thing that could make me part of something bigger than myself. Sure, my name is etched in stone, but there is no one to utter it with a love that resonates through generations. Un enfant de mon âme. A child of my soul, he thought. An experienced polyglot and globetrotter, Charles was in the unsettling stillness of his penthouse, high above the city that never sleeps. Despite his towering achievements, he felt trapped by the very success he had worked so hard to achieve. Every deal he closed, every dollar added to his accounts, felt like a dim star in the vast darkness of his inner world. Love, with its chaotic and unpredictable nature, was a sea he had no interest in navigating. Too risky, too unstable. What he longed for was something simple, a seed he could plant in fertile ground. A son, not a wife bound by fragile promises, but an heir to continue his legacy when he was gone. Something, someone, that was his. He did not want to be part of the heart's storms. After 2 failed marriages, Charles saw love as nothing more than a breeding ground for chaos. There is no room in my life for another emotional disaster, he reminded himself often. His ex-wives had only loved his wealth and the image he projected, not the man he truly was. Now his focus had shifted to something more tangible, an heir. No more empty relationships or fleeting commitments, just someone to carry on his lineage without unnecessary complications. Later that same day, as he navigated the congested streets of New York in his Lamborghini Diablo, Charles found himself stopped at a red light near Central Park. The city's familiar chaos swirled around him when suddenly, a weathered figure appeared at his window. It was a young homeless woman with pale skin, unkempt hair, and piercing blue eyes. She held out her hand, her expression a mix of resignation and hope. In a voice barely audible, she asked, "Do you have anything for me?" Charles looked at her with cold detachment, his irritation evident in every motion. "Get lost," he snapped, speeding away as soon as the light turned green. "Why waste time on these miseries? My life is too meticulously planned for such nonsense. I have my own problems." Charles's thoughts swirled as he moved through the city streets, an unsettling feeling refusing to leave him. His mind kept returning to the look in the young woman's eyes. There was something there, something that plucked a chord he didn't even know he had. Abruptly, he pulled over a few blocks ahead, took a deep breath, muttered under his breath, and turned the car around, heading back to the intersection where he had seen her. He found her again, lost in the city's chaos, like a shadow blending into the noise. Pulling his Lamborghini Diablo to the curb, he rolled down his window. "Get in, no questions," he said, his tone cold, as if giving a casual command. The young woman stared at him, her gaze blue like a wounded, time-worn sky. She took a small step back, suspicion etched on her face. Life on the streets had taught her to read between the lines and protect herself. Shaking her head, she replied with quiet resolve, her voice conveying a mix of dignity and caution. "I'm not that kind of woman, if that's what you're looking for." Charles raised an eyebrow. Something stirred within him, but his expression remained impassive. "Do you seriously believe a man like me would be interested in someone like you for that?" His voice was sharp, unyielding. "You don't look remotely attractive enough to interest me. Wei, you are safe with me. So stop talking nonsense and get in. I don't have all day. Or would you prefer to wander the streets and freeze tonight?" She blinked, taken aback by his bluntness. After a moment of hesitation, she relented. There was something disarmingly genuine in his demeanor, even in its harshness. She got into the passenger seat, her movements cautious. The car purred as it rejoined the city's flow. In the silence that followed, Charles glanced at her from the corner of his eye. She seemed young, maybe 28. But life had clearly taken its toll. Breaking the silence with the same detached tone he used in his business dealings, he spoke. "I'm going to make you a life-changing offer." His voice was calm, calculating. The voice of a man accustomed to negotiating every word. "I want a child, not a wife, not a relationship, just a child. I'll pay you a fortune and take care of you throughout the pregnancy. All I need is your womb. After that, you are free to go." Her eyes went wide, struggling to process what she had just heard. "A child? You promised you wouldn't touch me." "Of course not. It will be through artificial insemination. What did you think? Anything else would be unthinkable." Charles replied, his tone matter-of-fact, as if he were discussing the most logical solution to a practical problem. She fell silent, the noise of the city fading into the background as her mind raced. She thought of how far she had fallen, a shattered dream, a foreign land. And now this. Her life, once full of promise in France, was now in ruins. She had no family, no roots, just an overwhelming sense of loneliness. She doubted he could understand. As a polyglot. "And man of the world," he heard her softly mutter to herself in French, the words heavy with resignation and faint hope. "La misère n'a pas de fin." But Charles interrupted her reverie. "Do you think I don't understand what you just said? I am a cosmopolitan businessman, don't you forget. You said that misery has no end." He paused, his tone still cold, but slightly intrigued. "Is this your way out?" She let out a long sigh, her shoulders slumping as she nodded, surrendering to the reality of her circumstances. He pushed on, his voice as detached as ever. "I have 2 questions. What is your name, and what are you running from?" "Eva Ferrero. I am French," she finally replied, her voice trembling but with a fragile dignity. "I came to the U.S. 5 years ago, crossing the Atlantic for a future I thought awaited me. When I got here, France seemed to fade from my heart. I thought sacrifice would lead to rewards, and that this country would welcome me with open arms. But this city took everything I once was, consuming me bit by bit. I have lost so much, jobs, dreams, even the will to remember why I was fighting. Now I wander these streets invisible, aimless." Charles, maintaining his composed demeanor, looked at her with the same intensity he had reserved for a multi-million-dollar deal, although something within him began to shift. It was just a spark, a faint echo of a forgotten emotion. Eva continued, her gaze fixed on some distant corner of her own memory. "What am I trying to run from?" she repeated, almost as if she were asking herself. "Everything. This broken life, the empty promises I made to myself, these streets that whisper my failures with every step. I just want to go home, France. Sometimes I dream of its fields, the scent of chestnut trees, and the sound of rain on my village's rooftops. But here, dreams come at too high a price, and I don't even have enough to buy my way back." A heavy silence hung between them. Ava's words had pierced Charles's armor. This woman, this stranger, stood before him with a raw, unfiltered truth that disarmed him. What was behind those blue, life-scarred eyes? She was a painful reflection of his own loneliness, though hers manifested in a much more brutal form. He took a deep breath, regaining his calculated composure. His expression hardened once more. His voice returned to its usual cold tone. "I understand," he said, pausing for a moment to study her. "Now, I'll ask you only once. Will you accept my proposal? Will you have my child, and then leave? I will allocate a considerable sum for you to return to France and live comfortably there." Ava looked at him with a mix of resignation and relief. For a moment, she thought of all the times she had fallen, every battle she had lost. This deal might be the only key to freeing herself from this endless cycle. She lowered her head, closing her eyes briefly, and after a soft sigh, she replied, "Do I have another option?" Her tone was soft but resolved. "I accept." Charles nodded with the same efficiency he applied to closing a stock market transaction. "We will sign a contract. Since we will have some shared terms, I would like to know your name. And I have one more question for you. Why would you need a womb without love?" Ava asked. "You have everything necessary for someone of your status to fall in love with you." Charles Montblanc, still calculating and with a steel-like expression, could not ignore the impact of her question. He was not used to anyone confronting him so directly, especially when he believed he was in complete control. The engine of his Lamborghini hummed under his hands, and the city noise seemed to fade into the background, his gray eyes fixed on Ava's, and for a brief moment, a whirlwind of emotions ran through him. Nostalgia, frustration, maybe even a flash of vulnerability, but he wouldn't let her see. Taking a deliberate pause, Charles inhaled deeply, just as he would before launching a monumental figure in a high-stakes negotiation. His response was just another verbal transaction, a contract wrapped in words. "My name is Charles Montblanc, and you're right about one thing," he said, his tone cold and calculating as usual. "I have it all. Power, wealth, influence. People respect me or fear me. But love?" He stopped, letting the word hang in the air for a second before continuing. "Love is nothing more than a failed social contract, full of promises no one keeps. I've been there. I've had 2 marriages, both crumbled to ashes. They never loved me, only what I represented. The glitter of fortune, the facade of status." Charles tilted his head slightly, as if savoring the bitterness of old memories. "Falling in love with someone of my status," he repeated with a sharp, almost mocking tone. "I've done it twice. Both times, I learned that love is just a transaction disguised as emotion. I'm not interested in doing it again. I don't need a wife who stays for what I can provide her. I won't carry the weight of empty promises or endure another failed relationship. My only goal is my successor." His gaze hardened, control returning, bringing him back to the man who commanded markets, dominated transactions, and now had command over this moment. He leaned in slightly, his tone still cold but direct. "Your words are as calculating as you are," the young woman said, with a sincerity that took him by surprise. "But I see something underneath all that, Charles. I see someone who doesn't just fear love, but craves it more than he's willing to admit. Loneliness can disguise itself as strength, but it eventually always shows its true face." Charles didn't react. He simply looked forward and started the car, letting the roar of the engine fill the silence between them. He drove without a word, taking her to his mansion on the Upper East Side, a marble and steel fortress, grand yet lifeless, much like the man who built it. When they arrived, Charles parked the car in the underground garage and said nothing. Ava just stared at the massive building, a mix of awe and unease washing over her. She hadn't seen this level of luxury in years. It felt like crossing an invisible threshold, stepping into a world completely alien to her. Charles got out, and as Ava followed, he stopped and looked at her for a moment. His eyes scanned her worn clothes and fragile demeanor, the stark contrast between his impeccable Lamborghini and the hardened woman he had unexpectedly brought into his life. With a small gesture, as if solving a logistical problem, he said, "Come with me." Finally breaking the silence, he led her inside the mansion. The gleaming white marble walls, the towering staircase, and paintings by artists she had only seen in books made it clear that this was not a home, but a museum. The coldness of the place only emphasized its detachment, making it feel unreal. Charles guided her to a spacious living room, decorated with a minimalist elegance that oozed wealth. He gave a short command to a middle-aged woman who appeared the moment they entered. "Stephanie, make her presentable. Clothes, a bath, food, whatever she needs, and keep this between us. The rest of the staff doesn't need to know." His words were clinical, his tone indifferent, as if he were closing another deal. The assistant nodded, and with a warm smile that contrasted with Charles's demeanor, she motioned for Ava to follow her down a hallway towards one of the guest rooms. "Come on, let's get you settled," Stephanie said kindly. Ava followed in silence, still taking in her surroundings. She knew this was just the beginning of an arrangement that would alter her life forever. A couple of hours later, Charles sat in his office, a vast room lined with leather-bound bookshelves and large windows offering a panoramic view of the Manhattan skyline. Seated behind a dark wood desk, he focused on the documents in front of him as his trusted lawyer, Thomas Fuentes, meticulously reviewed the details of the contract. A knock interrupted the quiet. "Come in," Charles said, without looking up from the papers. His housekeeper, Elizabeth, entered with her usual composure, her hands neatly clasped. "Mr. Montblanc, you called?" she asked. Charles looked at her briefly. "Yes, Elizabeth. Bring the young lady here right away." "Of course, sir," Elizabeth responded, and left the room with the same calm efficiency with which she had entered. Minutes passed, and the room filled with an almost tangible tension, like the calm before a storm. Both men, engrossed in their respective tasks, waited in silence until another soft knock broke the quiet. "Come in," Charles repeated, his tone flat. The door creaked open, and what happened next left both men speechless. Standing in the doorway was Ava, completely transformed. The disheveled, broken figure they had seen before was gone. She was now radiant, radiating an almost otherworldly beauty. Her hair, now clean and shiny, fell in soft waves, catching the light like strands of gold. Her blue eyes, once dull, now gleamed with the clarity of a sky after a storm. She seemed taller and more confident, her posture elegant, yet understated. She wore a simple but sophisticated outfit that accentuated her slender figure, and her movements conveyed a quiet grace that suggested an inner blossoming. Thomas Fuentes froze momentarily, his gaze fixed on her as if he were mesmerized. He finally managed to speak. "Miss," he murmured, breaking the silence with an unplanned compliment. "You are absolutely stunning." Ava, who had been looking down, lifted her eyes at his words. A soft blush colored her cheeks as she absorbed the unexpected compliment, Though surprised, she quickly regained her composure, her expression firm once more. Charles, however, felt an unusual chill run down his spine, a strange, unpleasant pain in his stomach. It was an emotion he didn't quite understand, or perhaps didn't want to acknowledge. Jealousy, dark and insistent, crept into his chest. He turned his attention to Thomas, masking his discomfort. "Very well," he said, his voice sharper than necessary, cutting through the moment. "Let's proceed with the review of the contract terms." His words conveyed a chill as he spread the document on the desk. Ava stepped forward, her heels making a soft click against the polished floor. The tension in the room was almost palpable as the three of them proceeded with a formality that hinted at unspoken feelings. In the end, the contract was signed, binding them to terms that would inevitably alter the course of their lives. Do you think Charles was right to believe that love was nothing more than a failed social contract? Or is Ava right that love is something that can't be controlled? The first chapter. That morning, Charles woke up early as usual, but with an unusual weight on his mind. The Manhattan dawn painted the sky in soft shades of pink and gold, sunlight pouring through the towering windows of his mansion. The city stirred below, but his thoughts were elsewhere. The contract lingered on his mind as he walked to the wing where Ava was sleeping, his footsteps echoing in the silent house. But what Charles didn't realize was that no matter how much we try to define our desires on paper, the heart remains a mystery that no document can contain. He knocked softly on her door before opening it with determination. His expression, as always, was cold and unyielding. "We are leaving at once," he announced, his tone leaving no room for debate. Ava, still groggy, looked at him with a mix of confusion and fatigue, her mind struggling to grasp what was happening. "Where are we going?" she asked, as she slowly got out of bed, the sunlight flooding the room and softening the sharpness of Charles's words. "To fulfill the first clause of the contract," he responded dryly. Minutes later, they were in Charles's Lamborghini Diablo, the engine roaring as fiercely as the city coming to life around them. Charles drove in silence, his face as unreadable as ever. Inside the car, however, the air was dense with unspoken thoughts. Ava looked out the window, watching the buildings pass like fleeting shadows of her fractured life. Words lingered in her mind, deep thoughts she had yet to voice. Sometimes the stillness between two people can be louder than anything that is said. The car finally stopped in front of the city's most prestigious fertility clinic, a place that, like everything in Charles's world, oozed wealth and perfection. The sleek silver sign outside was a subtle mark of exclusivity, instantly recognizable to New York's upper class. Ava got out of the car, her gaze lifting to the towering building. In that moment, a thought crossed her mind, one that went beyond the terms of the contract they were bound by. To bring a life into the world is never an empty act, no matter how it begins. As this life grows within me, it will be loved. This is not just a deal, it is the beginning of something deeper, something no contract or fate can take from me. Charles, always silent, walked by her side, seemingly indifferent to the emotions that were beginning to swirl within Ava. Together, they passed through the clinic's automatic doors, a place where the pristine white walls seemed designed to erase doubt or hesitation. It was as if the luxury and sterility of the space could simplify the complexity of what they were about to do. Yet in Ava's heart, the questions and emotions remained unanswered. The heaviest steps are always the ones taken with resignation, because the soul never stops looking for its voice, even when silence feels like the only option. They were greeted immediately by a medical team, their professionalism polished to perfection. Each explanation of the process was delivered with measured precision, devoid of emotion, as if they too were part of a contract bound only by science. Ava nodded, offering no response. Acceptance can often feel like surrender, but sometimes it is the only way forward. The process was scheduled to be quick, but not instantaneous. Consultations, tests, and medical checkups were carefully planned to ensure everything went smoothly. In the days that followed, their visits to the clinic became routine, each one making the weight of the agreement more palpable. It loomed between them, invisible, yet inescapable, like a shadow. Some agreements extend far beyond the paperwork. It is the promises we make to ourselves that truly shape our destinies. Ava, though she kept her thoughts to herself, understood that the arrangement with Charles was not just a legal contract, but a deeper emotional responsibility that no clause could ever fully capture. Life often demands things from us that cannot be written down. Sometimes the deepest obligations are the ones we choose to carry without being asked. Finally, the day of the insemination arrived. As expected, the process was as clinical and detached as everything Charles had orchestrated. The sterile, controlled environment only emphasized the calculated nature of their arrangement. But for Ava, the coldness of the room could not extinguish the warmth growing within her heart. As the medical team worked with precision, her thoughts and emotions were elsewhere, tied to the life she was about to carry. For her, what was happening inside her body was not just a procedure. It was sacred. Staring at the white ceiling of the clinic, her mind wandered to the future. A lump formed in her throat as she closed her eyes. Something deep within her stirred, whispering truths she couldn't ignore. This is not just a contract. This is a life I will love with all my heart, even if it was born from this agreement. She placed a hand on her abdomen, feeling that her world was about to change. The love she began to feel was not born from a contract, but from the bond that was already forming between her and the life growing inside her. On the way home, the silence in the car was dense and oppressive. Ava stared out the window as the city passed in a blur of light and shadow. Finally, Charles broke the silence, his tone as detached as ever. "This was just the first step. Now we wait," he said, his words sounding more like the conclusion of a business deal than the beginning of a new life. She glanced at him uncomfortable. His cold, pragmatic tone left her uneasy. To Charles, it seemed that what had just happened was nothing more than another item checked off his meticulously organized to-do list. Ava took a deep breath, knowing she had something to say. Something she doubted Charles, with all his emotional detachment, was ready to hear. Her voice, firm but tinged with emotion, broke the tension. "Children are not just the product of desire or rational planning," she said. "They are reflections of our souls, the legacy we leave behind when we are no longer here to tell our story. Today, we have done more than fulfill a clause. We have lit a flame, one that no contract could ever extinguish. A flame born of life, not of wealth or agreements." Charles, who had maintained his impenetrable composure throughout, was shaken by her words. They pierced through him, leaving a mark he couldn't ignore. A chill ran down his spine, an unfamiliar feeling for someone who had long buried his emotions. For the first time, he truly saw Ava, a woman capable of stirring something deep within his carefully guarded heart. He pulled the car over on a deserted street and turned to her, his expression unreadable, but his gaze was lingering as if he were seeing her for the first time. Charles's eyes, usually cold and distant, now held an emotion he couldn't name. What do you know about the soul?" he asked in a whisper, which betrayed a vulnerability he had never shown before. Ava held his gaze, steady and unyielding, her voice quiet with the wisdom of someone who had lived on the edge of life itself. "The soul is not for sale, Charles. No contract or wealth can own it. Love, whether you accept it or not, will always find its way into what you create." Her words resonated deeply within him, echoing in a way he couldn't ignore. A forgotten feeling took hold of him, sending chills down his spine. For the first time in years, Charles Montblanc had no answer. The man who always controlled every detail of his life, who navigated existence as if it were a perfect business, now found himself in silence, face to face with a truth he couldn't negotiate. Do you think a deal like this could truly work? Or will emotions always end up breaking the coldest agreements? Share your opinion in the comments. The first signs since the procedure, their interactions had been minimal, limited to the essentials. Each kept their distance, yet both were keenly aware that something bigger was unfolding between them. Like a river flowing towards an invisible destination, life had begun to take shape, though neither of them could predict where it would lead. Destiny, after all, is a current that moves through us, its direction always a mystery. Now, the fertility clinic in Manhattan was waiting for them. This time, the air in the car felt heavier, as if they both sensed that the words they were about to hear would alter the course of their lives. Charles drove in his usual silence, his face unreadable, but inside a mix of anticipation and something unnameable swirled. Ava stared out the window, seemingly calm, but inwardly consumed by a storm of emotions. The soul's answers are rarely spoken. They reside in the silences that surround them. The medical team greeted them with quiet professionalism. A sign on the clinic wall read, "Creation is always a divine act, a whispered breath from the universe." The gynecologist, a middle-aged man of composed demeanor, greeted them with a kind smile. "Good morning, Mr. and Mrs. Montblanc," he said, leading them to a private room. "Today we will find out if the procedure was successful." As they walked to the examination room, Ava's heart raced. She knew this moment would change her life forever. It was not just a medical appointment, it was a bridge between the mundane and the profound. Not understanding why, Charles took her hand and squeezed it gently, an unusual softness to his touch. The heart, when it hears the existence of a new life, cannot help but beat faster. "It recognizes its own echo in every beginning," Ava said, her words filled with the wisdom that so often left Charles speechless. "Please sit here, Mrs. Montblanc," the doctor said, pointing to the examination table. Charles stood by the door, his usual expression of detachment in place, yet his eyes that had only seen numbers, now looked upon the essence of life itself. Ava lay back on the table, her body tense with anticipation. The gynecologist prepared the ultrasound, and the room was filled with a silence that seemed to hold the weight of the moment. Charles's eyes remained fixed on the screen, where the result of what had once been a mere written agreement was about to appear. But this was no longer just a contract. It had become something much greater. Paper can seal deals, but it is the heart that makes them real, he thought, feeling more human than he had felt in years. The cold gel touched Ava's stomach, and the room became even quieter. The sound of a heartbeat filled the air, and everyone froze. The gynecologist studied the monitor carefully, a soft smile playing on his face before he turned to them. "Life does not announce itself with fanfare," he said, "but with the simple, eternal rhythm of a beating heart." Then, with a pause that felt like an eternity, he continued, "Here it is," pointing to the image on the screen. "Everything seemed to be progressing as expected, but there was something else you had to know." The specialist added this in a serious tone. Charles, whose expression had remained unreadable until then, leaned forward, curiosity written all over his face. Ava glanced at him, sensing the tension in his posture. "What is it, doctor?" Charles asked, his voice firm but noticeably less cold than usual. The gynecologist gave him a small, kind smile, pointing to several tiny shapes on the screen. "There's not just one heartbeat, there are 3, the doctor said. "Congratulations, you are expecting triplets." Time seemed to freeze. 3 heartbeats, 3 lives. Ava felt a chill run down her spine as tears of joy welled up in her eyes, a happiness she couldn't fully comprehend. 3 little hearts were beating in perfect harmony inside her. Charles felt an overwhelming wave of joy and, in an uncharacteristic gesture, leaned down to give Ava a gentle kiss on the forehead. She, in turn, instinctively placed her hands on her belly, her thoughts filled with the new lives growing inside her. Love is not measured with contracts or agreements. It multiplies, overflows, and takes forms that not even destiny can predict. Charles, now standing by the door again, looked at her differently this time, with an openness that suggested something within him was beginning to thaw. He realized that the woman in front of him was not just the person who was carrying his heir. She was someone who, in some inexplicable way, was sharing existence's greatest miracle with him. Charles, a man unaccustomed to caring for others, felt something shift inside him that afternoon, 3 months after the insemination. He later found himself standing in the doorway of the living room, watching Ava as she sat on the terrace. The soft glow of the setting sun bathed her in a golden light. She was gazing at the horizon, her expression serene, as if her heart had found a rare moment of calm in a noisy world. Ava, who was already showing the first signs of her pregnancy, brought a hand to her temple and closed her eyes briefly. Charles frowned, concern flickering on his face. He wasn't used to seeing her like this, vulnerable. She had always seemed strong, almost unbreakable, even in the midst of the cold, calculated arrangement they had made. Something instinctive stirred in him, compelling him to act. He walked to the terrace with determined steps. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice softer than usual, but still with his characteristic reserve. Ava slowly opened her eyes, meeting his gaze with a mix of surprise and calm. "Just a little dizzy," she replied, offering a faint smile, as if to downplay her discomfort. Charles hesitated for a moment, not knowing what to do. Normally he would have called Stephanie or someone else from the staff, but this time something made him respond differently. Without thinking too much, he leaned down and with a surprising gentleness that contrasted with his usual demeanor, lifted her into his arms. As he carried her, Charles became acutely aware not only of the lightness of her body, but also of the invisible weight of his own transformation. Ava, startled, looked at him with wide eyes. "You don't have to, Charles. I can walk," she said, her tone a mixture of humility and bewilderment, although there was no trace of protest in her words. "No," he replied firmly, but with an unfamiliar softness in his voice. "Let me. If you have made it this far, leave a comment that says cappuccino as a sign of love for us." "Thank you." The walk from the terrace to her bedroom was silent, but the silence was not awkward. Charles felt the rhythm of life with every step he took, her presence in his arms a poignant reminder of everything that was changing. Sometimes the deepest emotions are expressed in moments of stillness. When they arrived at her bedroom door, something shifted. Using his foot to push it open, he crossed the threshold, noticing how Ava's body tensed slightly in his arms. She looked around, her once serene eyes wide with a mix of surprise and awe. The room had been completely transformed. Every corner now spoke of the new lives they were about to welcome. Every detail in the room spoke of motherhood. The fresh scent of flowers lingered in the air, while a giant stuffed animal perched on the dresser turned the space into a sanctuary for the 3 little lives growing within her. "What is this?" Ava's voice, barely a whisper, broke the quiet as her eyes scanned every corner of the room. Her gaze was filled with a mixture of disbelief and awe. Charles, who had been maintaining his usual composure, allowed a flicker of vulnerability to cross his face. "I wanted you to feel more comfortable," he said softly. "I thought you'd like it." His tone was slow, almost hesitant, as if he were doubting his own decision. "I didn't expect this," she murmured, overwhelmed by the thoughtful details as he helped her lie back on the bed. Charles sat on the edge, watching her in silence as she took in the room's transformation. The silence between them was profound, yet it carried an unspoken depth. "I thought every new life deserves a space filled with light," Charles said finally, his voice surprising even himself. "A place where love can find its home." Ava looked at him, her gaze so intense it sent a shiver down his spine. Then she spoke softly, her words carrying weight. "Love asks for nothing in return, but it changes everything." Her voice was tender, deliberate and full of emotion. Even the hardest soul eventually lets itself be reshaped by it. Charles looked away for a moment, unable to bear the weight of her expression. Something inside him, long sealed away, began to crack. The stillness between them grew deeper, but this time it was a shared silence, one that brought them closer than either of them had anticipated. For the first time, Charles allowed himself to feel something, just a hint of warmth. The love he had held at bay was beginning to seep through the cracks in his armor. His hand remained intertwined with Ava's, and as the soft evening breeze came through the open windows, they both realized they were embarking on a journey far deeper than they had ever imagined. The big day. Charles woke up early that morning, the weight of the day pressing heavily upon him. In the past few weeks, his connection with Ava had grown into something deeper than the mere agreement that had brought them together. Unwittingly, he had started to care for her deeply, but today was different. Today would change everything. The mansion, despite its grandeur, was wrapped in an eerie quietness. It was as if time had stopped as the three lives within Ava drew closer to their grand arrival. Charles walked down the long hallway, his thoughts consumed by the momentous event that lay ahead. He stopped in front of her door, and just as he reached to grasp the knob, her faint voice called out to him. "Charles, I think it's time," she whispered, her tone trembling with emotion and nerves. Standing in the doorway, her face was radiant despite her exhaustion, lit by an inner glow. Charles's heart leaped. Without hesitation, he rushed to her side, silently helping her to stand and preparing to take her to the hospital for the moment that would change their lives forever. The Lamborghini Diablo's engine roared, but it was nothing compared to the frantic beat of their hearts. Ava, one hand on her rounded belly, glanced at Charles. She had seen him change. What had started as a purely transactional relationship now felt like something much deeper. "I'll be right here with you," Charles said softly, his voice calm but filled with resolve, as if nothing in the world could take him away from her in that moment. "Thank you, Charles," Ava murmured, her tone a mix of gratitude and emotion. The drive to the hospital passed in a blur. When they arrived, the medical team was already prepared and waiting. Ava was taken immediately to the delivery room, and Charles stayed by her side, holding her hand tightly. Time seemed to stretch as the contractions grew stronger. Every one of Ava's breaths, every squeeze of her hand, reverberated deep within Charles. "Breathe, Ava. You're doing amazing," he encouraged her, watching her endure the pain and strain of bringing not one, but 3 lives into the world. Minutes turned into hours. Finally, the first cry echoed in the room. A boy, his son. Charles felt his throat tighten, something inside him breaking and rebuilding all at once. The second cry followed shortly after. Another boy, then the third. A girl. 3 tiny hearts. 3 new lives. And every plan Charles had made before that moment seemed insignificant now. "They're perfect," Ava whispered, exhausted but radiant, as she looked at her newborns. Tears streamed down her face as her trembling hands caressed their tiny faces. It was a love she had not anticipated, a feeling that completely overwhelmed her. Charles, equally moved, held her hand, unable to look away from the tiny bodies now being cradled by the nurses. For the first time in his life, he felt a connection to something he couldn't buy, control, or predict. It was life in its purest form. But amidst the overwhelming joy, he noticed that Ava's tears were not just from happiness. There was also sadness in them, a pain he was only beginning to comprehend. She was crying, she feared, for the future, for the unyielding grasp on their agreement. Soon, she would have to leave these little beings she already loved with all her heart. She would have to let them go, handing them over to a life she could not be a part of. "Charles," Ava sobbed, "I don't want to leave them, but this was our deal, and I will honor it, even if it tears me apart." Charles felt his heart break a little more with every word she said. The joy he had felt moments before was now tinged with the cold reality of their agreement. The strict terms of their deal, the rigid clauses and legalities, felt meaningless in the face of Ava's tears. Without speaking, Charles leaned in and kissed her forehead as she continued to cry. A lump formed in his throat, a pressure in his chest he had never experienced before. He knew that something inside him had changed forever. Just like Ava, he could no longer ignore what truly mattered. Ava gently touched her daughter's face again, the tears still falling uncontrollably. She could not stop them. Neither could Charles. For both of them, everything had changed in a way they had not seen coming. In that moment, she realized that love, even when born from a contract, could overcome any deal written on paper. She didn't know how she would face what was ahead, but for now, all she could do was cry, holding on tightly to that fleeting moment with the children she had brought into the world, who would soon no longer be hers. Charles stood frozen, silently watching her pain, unable to speak. He knew this could not end this way. Something had to change. But he didn't know how just yet. A twist of fate. The morning after the birth, the soft light of dawn filtered through the hospital room windows, casting a gentle glow over the space. Ava rested after an exhausting night, her peaceful expression revealing the quiet satisfaction of having given life to 3 children. Charles, typically distant, had spent the night in a chair beside her bed, watching her as she slept. Although he tried to mask it, the vulnerability and exhaustion on Ava's face deeply moved him. When the sun came up, Charles decided to let her rest a little longer. He quietly left the room, careful not to wake her. He needed to get breakfast and planned to buy a few things to make her feel more comfortable. When he returned to the hospital, his footsteps echoed with determination down the hallway. Upon reaching Ava's room, he stopped, surprised by what he saw. The door was slightly ajar, and from the hall, he noticed how much the room had changed. There were flowers everywhere, dozens of vibrant bouquets filling the space. But what stopped him in his tracks was the sight of Thomas Fuentes, his trusted lawyer, sitting in the chair where Charles had spent the night. A strange feeling stirred within Charles as he froze in the doorway, observing the scene. Thomas leaned in towards Ava, speaking in a low voice. The words Charles overheard hit him like a punch. "Ava, I know everything has happened so fast, and what I'm about to say might surprise you," Thomas said softly, with a sweetness Charles had never heard from him. "But I can't let this moment slip away from me." Thomas paused, taking her hand gently. "Since I met you, something changed in me. You are an extraordinary woman." He hesitated before continuing, his sincerity unmistakable. "What I feel is real. I want to be by your side. And if you'll let me, I'd like to ask you something else. Ava, will you marry me?" he asked, revealing a stunning ring. At that very moment, Charles could not hold back any longer. He pushed the door open, striding into the room. The sound of the door startled them, causing Thomas to drop Ava's hand and turn to look at him, with the same composure as always. "Charles?" Thomas greeted him with a calm smile, as if nothing unusual was happening. "I didn't expect you back so soon." Charles walked slowly towards the bed, his face calm, but his eyes betrayed an inner storm. He looked at Ava, who seemed as shocked as he was by what had just occurred. Then his gaze shifted to the flowers. Those vibrant bouquets filled the room with a sweetness that was reminiscent of Rome. Flowers that were not there when she left. "Thomas," Charles said coldly, "the flowers are yours, aren't they?" Thomas nodded, standing calmly in the room. "She deserves to be surrounded by beauty after all. Don't you agree, Charles?" His comment, though soft-toned, hung in the air like a challenge. Charles did not respond immediately. The tension in the room was palpable, and inside he was wrestling with a storm of emotions, jealousy and confusion, feelings he was not used to handling. "I see you've also offered her something more," Charles said, his voice tinged with an icy sarcasm. "Marriage, Thomas? Here in the hospital, right after she has given birth?" Thomas rose from his chair with a deliberate calm. "Yes, Charles, I have offered her something real, something not bound by contracts and agreements. I believe that's what she needs. Someone who cares for her, for who she is, not for some arrangement." Charles's fists clenched as he struggled to maintain his composure. He had never felt so out of control, so exposed. All this time he thought everything had been perfectly calculated. He had convinced himself that he was the sole architect of Ava and his children's future. Now he realized that was not true. Thomas's presence was undeniable, and his intentions stretched beyond mere legality. "I don't think this is the right time to push emotional decisions on someone who has just gone through what Ava has endured," Charles said firmly. "She needs to rest, not more pressure." Thomas met Charles's gaze, a mix of challenge and calm in his expression. "You're right, Charles. This is not the time for pressure, but it's also not the time to pretend that feelings don't exist. What I feel for her is not going to go away just because you want everything to remain a business arrangement." Ava, who had remained silent, looked at both of them in disbelief. She was exhausted and confused, and the last thing she needed was for two men to start a struggle in her hospital room. "Thomas, Charles," she whispered, bringing a hand to her forehead. "Please, not now. I just want to rest." Both men backed down, realizing the situation was getting out of hand. Thomas gave Ava one last look before heading for the door. "Rest, Ava. I'll be here if you need me," he said softly before leaving. When the door closed, Charles stood in silence by the bedside, unsure of what to say. The silence between them was heavy, but it carried an unspoken truth that neither of them was ready to face. Charles slowly sat in the empty chair by the bed, watching as Ava closed her eyes, overwhelmed by everything that had occurred. But as he watched her sleep, one thought became clearer and clearer in his mind. This was no longer just a contract, and that terrified him. Do you think Thomas has the right to propose to Ava? Or do you think he should have respected the agreement? The greatest love. 3 months had passed since Ava had given birth to the triplets. 3 months filled with an overwhelming love for her children, but also a deep and painful sadness about the impending separation outlined in the contract. According to the terms, the day had arrived, the day she was to leave the mansion, leave her children, and walk away from everything she had come to know since signing the agreement. In her room, surrounded by the few belongings that reminded her of her children, Ava packed the little she could take with her. A small, almost empty suitcase only held the essentials. The wealth Charles had promised her meant nothing now. She didn't want the money. As she zipped up the suitcase, the pain in her chest felt unbearable. Tears streamed down her face as she held each of her 3 babies in her arms, one by one, kissing their tiny faces, knowing this would be the last time she would see them. The triplets, oblivious to their mother's anguish, slept peacefully in their cribs. Ava stood staring at them, engraving every small detail into her memory, their angelic faces, their tiny fingers, and their soft breaths. She had signed the contract, hoping it would secure a future, but she never imagined it would cost her her soul. I should have just stayed wandering, she thought between sobs, instead of enduring this heart-wrenching agony. She loved those children, with all her being. And although she hated to admit it, she loved him too. Ava descended the mansion's grand staircase with heavy, deliberate steps, dragging her small suitcase behind her. Every step felt like a dagger in her heart. The sound of her shoes echoed in the vast, empty hall, making the mansion's grandeur feel cold and distant. What had once been a sanctuary now felt like nothing more than a reminder of the pain that awaited her. Reaching the massive front door, her trembling hand rested on the knob. She couldn't believe this was truly the end. Taking a deep breath to steel herself, she prepared to leave for the airport and head to a country that no longer felt like a home. She was determined to honor the contract she had signed. But as her hand began to turn the knob, a deep voice cut through the silence like thunder. "Ava, where are you going?" Charles's voice echoed from somewhere deep in the mansion. She froze, but did not turn around. "Is it Thomas Fuentes, isn't it?" he pressed, coming closer. "It's because you've fallen in love with him, isn't it?" Ava squeezed her eyes shut, her emotions swirling in a storm of pain and anger. She took a moment to compose herself before slowly turning to face him. Her tear-streaked face met his. "You don't understand anything," she said, her voice filled with a mix of frustration and desperation. "This is not about Thomas Fuentes. Do you remember the last clause of the contract? I have to leave this mansion and leave the country 90 days after giving birth. That's what we agreed to, Charles." He stopped a few feet away, breathing heavily, but his eyes betrayed more than just concern. They revealed fear. Fear of losing her. Without a word, Charles reached into his pocket and pulled out the contract. The document that had defined their strange relationship from the beginning. Holding it firmly in front of her, he did not read it or argue about it. Instead, he did something completely unexpected. With a sudden surge of emotion, Charles began to tear the contract into pieces, piece by piece, letting the fragments fall to the ground. Ava stared at him, stunned. "I'm sorry, Ava," Charles said, his voice breaking as he fell to his knees before her. "Do you know what you've taught me? Do you remember when I told you I couldn't love any woman again because 2 wives who only cared about money had hurt me?" He repeated the phrase. "It's crazy to hate all roses because one thorn pricked you. I don't want you to leave. I don't care about the contract or the deal we made. All I care about is you staying here, with our children, with me." The pain etched on Ava's face began to ease as she took in Charles's raw vulnerability. Charles had always been a man of unyielding strength and control, someone who never bent the knee to anyone, not out of pride, but because he had built a life where everything was perfectly in order. Yet here he was, on his knees, begging. Ava watched him for a moment that felt like an eternity. Then, with a mix of tenderness and resolve, she raised her hand and placed it gently on his head. "Love, Tom Sawyer," she said with a faint, bittersweet laugh, her tears now mixing with a different emotion. "Charles, how can you be so foolish?" Her voice broke slightly as her fingers stroked his hair. "It was always you I loved from the first day I saw you." Charles looked up, disbelief flashing in his eyes at her words. Ava smiled through her tears and continued. It was always you. From the moment you saved me on that street, from the instant our paths crossed in such a strange way, even though I never wanted to admit it, even when you hid me behind the terms of a contract, my heart was always yours. Still on his knees, Charles felt his entire world shift with those words. What had begun as a cold, calculated arrangement had grown into something far deeper than he could have ever imagined. Ava, he whispered, taking her hand. I love you too. I've loved you all this time, even when I tried to deny it. Please stay. Not for the children, not for the contract, but for us. I want us to be a family, to share our lives together. He paused, his voice filled with emotion. It would be the greatest honor of my life if you would be my wife and my only true love. Ava looked at him, her tear-filled eyes glistening, and without a moment's hesitation, she let go of the suitcase in her hand and embraced him tightly. Charles held her close, his embrace filled with the longing and warmth they had both craved. I love you, Charles, she whispered between sobs. Charles pulled her closer, and as he held her in his arms, he leaned in and sealed their unspoken words with a kiss, deep and passionate, that carried the weight of all that had been left unsaid for months. Months later, the once cold mansion was alive with joy and laughter. Charles and Ava's wedding was an intimate celebration filled with love and happiness. In their arms were their triplets, each a living testament to the fact that what began as an impersonal contract had blossomed into something extraordinary, a family. Charles had finally found what he had unknowingly been searching for, something greater than himself. As he looked at his wife and children, he realized that he had not only signed a contract, he had made a lifelong pact with love. If this story moved you, leave your mark with a like, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel to explore more meaningful stories with us. Share your feelings with us and tell us your own stories. Every word you share is a brick that helps create our strong and lasting community. Together, we will create a warm space where everyone can share and connect. Finally, don't miss the incredible stories that await you. We are always here to bring you the best selections, full of deep values, yet entertaining. See you soon.